Good afternoon. Welcome to the third meeting of the General Obligation Bond Neighborhood and City Services Subcommittee. I hereby call this meeting to order. First, what I'd like to do is to have all the subcommittee members to introduce themselves. So starting from my right and your left.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Rouse. I am here representing the Phoenix Blockwatch Advisory Board.
Good day, my name is Michael Brown. I represent the international nonprofit organization based in District 7.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Smith, and I'm currently working at Access as a housing program manager.
My name is Michelle Dodds, and I previously worked for the Historic Preservation Office.
My name is Abraham James. I'm the chair, and I'm also the chair of the Library Advisory Board.
My name is Gigi George. I am representing the Phoenix Historic Neighborhoods Coalition.
I'm Eva Olivas. I'm the with Phoenix Revitalization Corporation.
I'm Dan Osaran. I'm with the Desert Ridge Community Association.
Dan Clockey, I serve as the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you very much. We have interpreters today to provide Spanish translation. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Elsie Duarte, and along with my colleague Mario Barajas, we will be servicing as interpreters in today's meeting. I will now introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience and review some guidelines. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Elsie Duarte y junto con mi colega Mario Barajas estaremos sirviéndoles como intérpretes en la reunión de hoy. Al momento de hacer un comentario público, de favor les pedimos que hable despacio, con claridad y deténgase después de cada pocas oraciones para interpretarle de la manera más completa posible. Gracias. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. There will be a public comment during item 3 on today's agenda. I am planning to reserve at least 30 minutes to the public for public comment, but I will decide the duration and time limit for each speaker based on the available time and the number of individuals registered to speak. If you are attending in person and would like to speak, you will need to sign up at the kiosk located at the entrance of Council Chamber before the call to the public item begins. If you are attending virtually or watching a recording and would like to speak at a future GO Bond Committee meeting, please note you will need to register at least 2 hours prior to the start of the meeting. You may register to speak at Phoenix.gov/bond/meeting. Our first agenda item is to approval of our minutes for the last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. George. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Dodd. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The critical task for today's meeting is to discuss and, if possible, reach agreement on the ranking order list on projects that were put before as a recommendation to the executive committee. In the event we are not able to reach agreement today, we have the option to continue our discussion on the meeting schedule for Friday, September 30th. However, that will be the final opportunity for the subcommittee to agree to Staff prepared a presentation on the results of the ranking exercise that was completed by our subcommittee members. Following the presentation, I will give subcommittee members an opportunity to ask general questions about the information presented. But I ask that we hold off on deliberating until after the public comment period. Please proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, subcommittee members. Again, my name is Karen Peters, Deputy City Manager, and look forward to talking with you today about these exciting, important topics. So if the presentation is ready. There it is. So as you indicated, Mr. Chairman, today is the third meeting of the Neighborhoods and City Services Subcommittee. Today, we're going to go through a number of items. First, I will talk about the charge of the subcommittee. We'll have a review of the projects that are identified. There'll be a summary of the ranking results that were derived from the survey that you all completed. And thank you. And then we'll have the discussion and questions, and look forward to coming out of this maybe with agreement today, but if not, again, you have the next meeting to finalize. So with regard to the charge of the subcommittee, you'll remember that we have a multi-step process that has led us to this point. We have reviewed capital needs. We've received input and recommendations from the public. We now will prioritize projects and then develop a recommendation for the executive committee. We will be determining the very highest priority projects and programs and recommending funding levels for those items. We're, just to remind you, we're only going to be referring projects that cannot be reasonably deferred. So with that, I will ask Alan to give us a little bit of context before we get into the ranking, and look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Karen. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, what you see here is the $647 million prioritized capital needs list that you saw that was part of the overall bond prioritized list of items. And you know from our prior discussions that where the bond needs to be once the executive committee makes their recommendation is at that $500 million mark. Clearly, that leaves a funding gap of $147 million, which is about 22.7%. And so what staff has put forward here is just getting you to start thinking about the charge, which was to prioritize what are the important projects, but also then look at how you can choose to make some appropriate cuts that will make sure that either what you're sending forward is in a prioritized list, but also is trying to get towards pushing down some of that funding to help the executive committee with their work. This is one initial kind of illustration about how something could be done. There is no set formula or requirement for this. The executive committee will get a series of recommendations from all of the subcommittees. There's a standardized form that we filled out by staff after you guys reach your conclusion based upon what your recommendations are, and then that goes to the executive committee for their consideration. If you just took that 22% cut across the board based upon what was in the prioritized projects, this is kind of how it would lay out in the various subcommittees. Again, that might not be how the executive committee does it at all, but this is one idea to try and have you guys provide some information to help you conceptualize how you might tackle some of the work you have to do over today's meeting and then potentially into that fourth meeting. And so you can see in our neighborhoods and city services one here, that one is $52.4 million based upon the prioritized needs, And if we were going to apply that 22% cut, it would be trying to get down to $40.5 million as part of your recommendation. Again, this is not something that staff is saying you have to do it this way. It really is trying to help give you some information on how to conceptualize the task that the executive committee and you guys are tasked with doing, and trying to tackle some of that important work as you go forward and do this. With that, I am going to turn this over after this slide right here to Adam, who's going to walk us through the exact results. And so you can see right here that we have, this is the existing breakouts that we have for our committee here in the prioritized projects, 29.5 with libraries, 30.3 with city facilities, and 6.5 for historic preservation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who is going to get into your results, and then we're all around to happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager Stevenson and Deputy City Manager Peters. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I'm going to go over the results. If we have general questions about the process with the ranking, we'll certainly be able to entertain those at the conclusion of my presentation. However, we recommend that we move forward with the public comment before we get into any real substantive discussion of the recommendation from the subcommittee. So with that, the Neighborhoods and City Services Subcommittee identified 12 projects to include in the initial ranking effort. Those included 3 library projects, 1 new branch library at Desert View, in Desert View Village, a new branch library in Estrella Village, the Yucca Library expansion at approximately 15th Avenue and Missouri. 3 city facilities projects, the ADA improvements, the City Service Center improvements, and the downtown property improvements. There were 5 prioritized historic preservation projects, the restoration of Heritage Square, the rehabilitation of Orpheum Theater, and then the 3 HP grant programs that you see listed there. A 6th HP project, the Dupe Adobe restoration, was identified as a future need in the capital needs study, and the subcommittee asked that that item also be included in the ranking process. There were no additional proposals that came from the public. Those 12 projects combined to total $66.7 million. In addition to ranking the 12 projects, the subcommittee members were also asked about funding levels for each project. The survey results, just to remind the subcommittee, as we discussed prior to distributing the survey, the results of the survey are not binding to the subcommittee in any way. The intent's not that the outcome would dictate the subcommittee's recommendation to executive committee, but that the outcome would act as a starting point for subcommittee deliberations. Before looking at the results, I want to quickly explain the rules that we used for the ranking process and describe how you might interpret those rules to help inform your decisions. So the median value was used to put the projects in rank order, and the average rank was used as a tiebreaker. So what does this mean? Well, if the median value is a low number, let's say 2, then you know the majority of the subcommittee members ranked that project second or higher. If the median value is a high number, say 11, then you know the majority of subcommittee members ranked that project 11th or lower. Finally, if 2 projects have the same median value, then we ordered the projects based on the average rank for those projects. For example, if Project A and Project B both have a median of 4, but the average rank for A is 5 and B is 3, then Project B would be ordered ahead of Project A. So I'm going to share the outcome of the survey. The top-ranked item was the new branch library at the Estrella Civic Space. I want to spend just a couple of minutes here to kind of orient you to the table, and then I will populate the rest of the table with the other projects. So as you can see, starting left to right, the rank shows up in the first column. This is the highest ranked project, as I mentioned. You see the project name, and then getting over into the statistics, you can see where the median fell out at 3, so we know that the majority of subcommittee members ranked this project third or higher on your ranking. This did have a high ranking of first and a low ranking of 12th, the highest and the lowest possible. And you see the average there of 5.22. I will go ahead and populate the rest of this slide. After we've displayed the ranking outcome, I'm going to pull up information on the funding levels. And so there's 2 slides that are going to have this list of projects. The second slide will have the list in the same order, but with the funding levels instead of the statistics. So City Facility ADA improvements 2, Yucca Branch Library expansion 3, City Service Center property improvements 4, 5th was Downtown City property improvements, 6th HP Warehouse and Threatened Building Program, 7th HP Demonstration Project Grants, 8th Heritage Square Facilities Restoration, 9th Orpheum Theater Exterior Rehabilitation, 10th HP Exterior Rehab Grant Program, 11th Dupa Adobe Restoration, and finally the new branch library at Desert View Civic Space. Again, I'm going to go to the next slide. All these projects will remain in the same order, but we'll take a look at the funding level. So here you can see the ranking. Here you see the estimated cost for each project, how subcommittee members felt in terms of whether a project needed more funding. This is the number of subcommittee members that clicked that box on the survey. The number of subcommittee members that felt that the project should be funded at a lower level, and then finally the DNF is do not fund, the number of subcommittee members that felt those particular projects should not go forward as part of this bond program. Finally, you can see the running total on the far right of the slide. Again, with this, if there are general questions about the process, certainly we are happy to entertain those questions. But our recommendation would be to go to public comment before we really delve into the ranking discussion.
Okay. All right. We will go into public, allow the public to make comments before we get into any discussions. Okay? All right.
Mr. Chairman, the city attorney can give some instructions regarding public comment, if that's helpful.
I cannot hear you. You're
So sorry. The city attorney is here to explain the rules for public comment.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Members of the public may speak to comment on general obligation bond program. The city code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, committee members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The committee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending claims or litigation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Right now, we have 6 speakers registered today, including 2 virtual participants wishing to speak. I will give you 2 minutes. We will start with the virtual participant. When your name is called and your audio device will be unmuted, and you'll begin your remarks. At the conclusion of the virtual speakers, we will invite in-person attendees to the podium to address the committee. We'll start, please. Staff, who's the first speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first speaker is Billy Shields, virtually, followed by Lisa Perez. Billy, are you on the line? Billy is not on the line. Our next speaker is Lisa Perez, followed by Diane Wiesenthal in the upper council chambers. Lisa, are you on the line?
I am.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Abraham and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today and speak about the proposed new branch library at Estrella Civic Space. I am pleased to see the branch at Estrella Civic Space was ranked #1 in your initial ranking exercise, and I thank you for that. I moved to this area in 2013, and while I enjoy the rural vibe and less crowding of other urban areas of the city, I miss the access to services that are not available in our area and that I certainly took for granted, specifically the resources that a library offers to a community. Libraries are no longer books and story time. They are a temple of resources and information that can be available from toddlers to adults. If information is power, then a library and all the resources that it entails would be an amazing equalizer for our community. Internet access, job information, community gathering spaces, all in one building. That is not only a game changer, but it would be a quality of life change for our entire community. I thank you for your consideration of the Estrella Civic Park Library, and thank you for your time.
Our next speaker in the upper council chambers is Diane Wiesenthal, followed by Debbie Jang.
Hello. Again, my name is Diane Wiesenthal, and I have lived in the city of Phoenix for 17 years. Prior to moving here, however, I've lived in various cities and states across the country. And one of the things I've always considered before moving to a new environment is not only the obvious things such as cost of living, access to health, good schools, but libraries and library programs. Now, I realize that may sound a little odd at first and even a little geeky, but I believe that libraries reflect the culture of a city. It tells you a lot about the people who live in that city and about who governs the city. Phoenix has a very good library system. It provides services, as the first speaker already mentioned, for all different ages, from early childhood literacy and STEM programs to helping people who want to go to school and further their careers, perhaps start businesses or expand their business. It provides so many services that I think you all are aware of. Given that, why do I say then that Phoenix library system is very good, but not excellent? Not because of any fault of library administration or the hardworking branches, but simply because as Phoenix has grown and boomed in population, library system has not kept up with that growth. We need several more branches. I'm glad to see that one library is at the top of the list. I'm glad to see that Yucca isn't considered, hopefully, #3, because although Yucca is one of the busiest libraries in the system, it is also one of the smallest. I support Go Bond very strongly, and I encourage the committee to fund libraries throughout the city of Phoenix. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Debbie Jang, followed by Elizabeth Venable.
Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Jang. I am here in support of the expansion and improvements to the library system. I'm here representing the board of the Friends of the Phoenix Public Library, but I'm also here as a library kid myself. I grew up I moved to Phoenix in 1999 when I was 9 years old, and my parents were first-generation immigrants, and so even though they were extremely hardworking, it was we always didn't have all the resources that were needed, and the library was, in a lot of ways, our resource. And I'm a summer reading program alum, and that's where I got my love of reading and love of learning. And there's a direct lineage from the library system to where I am today. Because of my love of learning, I am now an attorney, which I've been for 6 years. I am an assistant federal public defender, helping and providing effective and high-quality representation to people of low-income backgrounds in the state of Arizona. And the city library was there when I was studying for my bar exam, too. So I just urge for the expansion and improvement to the library system. It is, to a lot of people, the wealthiest resource. It provides the summer reading program, increases access to literacy. It provides job readiness programs. It is book clubs. At this point, it may be one of the only places that doesn't require someone to pay to exist. And so with the ever-growing population in the city of Phoenix, I thank you for prioritizing the expansion and the improvements to the city library. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth Venable, followed by Frank Urban.
I know it's not the most popular category, but I wanted to again encourage you all to invest in human needs with this bond. I think that it's interesting when people say that other people are a nuisance or are not part of general society, want to exclude, when there's very little capacity and for housing, and most of the funding comes directly from the federal government. It doesn't come from the general fund most of the time, and even especially in the past 21 years. Granted, it's been better this last year, but I think if you look at the 20 years, it was zero before from the general fund. And so it shows what kind of priorities we have. And so I would suggest that people use the funds that are discretionary to help people who have human needs, including housing. The payoff is extraordinary, not just in the quality of living for the person and the people who are calling the person a nuisance. It's a person off the street, no longer a nuisance, if that's how people want to consider people on the streets. But also it lowers the cost of enforcement, emergency services, and medical services. And housing makes it so that not only does it provide human benefit, but it costs about half the actual cost of keeping a person on the streets. And obviously keeping a person on the streets makes it very difficult to have any quality of life. So I would encourage you all to invest in human needs, including housing.
Our final speaker is Frank Urban.
Hello, my name is Frank Urban. Like Elizabeth Venable, I'm here to speak on human needs. We just recently lost a good friend of ours who was houseless. Now I say houseless, not homeless, because there's a distinction on the streets. A houseless person is someone who's actually living on the streets, and a homeless person would be someone who's in a shelter like Cass. I think they need, I'm here to encourage you guys to put up more hydration stations, because this friend we lost was lost due to the heat. And some other human needs like porta potties around casts and like portable showers type of use for like camping and such. And with that, I'll close.
Chair James, Frank was our final speaker.
Thank you very much. This concludes our public comment period. Thanks to all who participated. As a reminder, our task is to develop a ranking ordered list of projects for the Executive Committee. We received the results of the ranking exercise that committee members completed. Those results are intended to provide a starting point to deliberate. I will open the meeting to subcommittee members for comments, questions, discussions. George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I have done extensive research on the two proposed new libraries on the agenda for our subcommittee, and I'd like to share that with the members. First, I visited Desert Sage Library on August the 17th, as well as the location for the proposed new branch library at the Estrella Civic Space at 99th Avenue and Lower Buckeye Road. Desert Sage is a lovely small library with perhaps room to expand. Leaving Desert Sage, I took a 6-mile trip to the proposed new library location at 99th Avenue and Lower Buckeye Road. It is an easy trip to the Desert Sage Library from that location, so I question adding a new library at Estrella Civic Space at this time. Further, I visited 3 branch libraries on September 7th in connection with the second proposed new library location at Deer Valley Road and Tatum Boulevard in the Desert View Civic Space. The libraries visited in order of rotation were Juniper, Desert Broom, and Mesquite. Juniper is a nice library, well lit and clean. It is 9 miles west of the proposed new library at Desert View. The Desert Broom Library is perhaps the most beautiful of all Phoenix libraries. It was built in 2005 and received LEED certification in 2006. However, it is shocking to learn that there is no public transportation in that area, so you need a car to get to Desert Broom. This library is just 6 miles north of the proposed Desert View Library. Mesquite Library was my last one to visit. This is my opinion and my opinion only. It is difficult to find, difficult to get into, and dark on the inside. I believe the citizens of this area deserve better. This library is 5.6 miles south of the proposed new Desert View Library. In summary, there are 2 libraries within 6 miles of the proposed new library at Desert View Civic Space and one more within 9 miles of Desert View Civic Space. After careful analysis, I would like to suggest to this subcommittee that we recommend that Estrella Civic Space Library and Desert View Civic Space Library be removed from our consideration and deferred to a future bond program. I also wish to suggest that money be repurposed into deferred maintenance for the existing 17 libraries and possibly ADA improvements for all 17 libraries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes,
Chair.
Mr. Arsenault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. George, I think, first of all, the Rita Hamilton last time addressed the concern that you had about whether or not new libraries would take away funding, and I believe she said that they would not take away funding from currently existing libraries. So I think that's an important point to remember. I also want to take an opportunity to address an interesting observation I see on the screen, which is that the number 1 and number 3 projects, ranked by median, of course, were the library expansions. And I think, it makes a lot of sense for government services to do for citizens what there is no way for them to do for themselves individually. So, and building a library is one of those things that individuals cannot do for themselves. So, to me, this means, especially these first 3 here, that the committee members, the majority of which understand the overall importance and impact of libraries on the public, and also the fact that libraries are public service endeavors. There's no way for people to raise ticket prices or rents on private companies that are using the facilities. There isn't a mechanism available to library goers other than bonds or taxes to fund a library the same way a theater can increase its prices. However, the confusing thing to me is that the last one on the list was also a new library at the Desert View Civic Space. And I was trying to look at this and trying to make sense of it and why this discrepancy exists. And the subcommittee either doesn't believe in the fundamental purpose of the library system, or it does believe in that fundamental purpose. And based on the rankings here, I see that there are a majority of folks that do believe in the fundamental purpose, that no matter your race, religion, location, or socioeconomic condition, you have a right to access a free library. I think the real reason for this discrepancy in the voting, though, goes to what a member of the public said at the last public comment session, which was that the people in Desert View are perceived to have more financial security and therefore don't need a library. I'm troubled by that, and I could be wrong in that perception. But I do want us to look at the facts of this library. Even as Ms. George said, the nearest library to Desert View is about 6 miles away, which is clearly too far for a child to bike to. There is one of the libraries that is close, has no public transportation. So getting to this library, these libraries, is very difficult. And the closest library is that dark library, Mesquite, which happens to be the busiest branch library in the Phoenix library system. And so supporting the Desert View Library would actually ease that burden on Mesquite. Within the next 8 years, the Desert Ridge area is going to have 119,000 residents alone, the size of many cities in this country. So given all of these facts, why would there be a discrepancy in the aggregate ratings? There are many high-density residential apartments within Desert Ridge as well, and projects like that are being built. So it seems to me that the committee, based on ranking number 1 and 3, believes in the concept of libraries for all of its citizens. In addition, a library is something that no matter what your socioeconomic condition is, it's something that an individual can't do for themselves. It takes the collective of the public through something like a bond. There's no ability to charge higher rent to businesses using the space or to increase ticket prices. There is only one way to build a library, and you have to believe that every citizen deserves library access. So I'll ask my fellow subcommittee members to please reconsider the rankings for all 3 libraries, not just Estrella and Yucca. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clockey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at the list here in front of us that's, I think, is on the screen over there, I was trying to do some quick math, and if you look at sort of the 3 buckets that money is funded towards, the way that it's funded and is approximately 40% of the money for libraries, 40% of the money for city facilities, and 10% of the money for historic preservation. If you look at sort of the expectation in terms of what we fund of this entire list, it basically gets us down through item number 7, about $52.5 million, which would mean items number 8 through 12 would be essentially most likely left off. If you look at items number 8, 9, 10, and 11, that totals approximately $3.8 million of the roughly $6.5 million that historic preservation is being asked to look at for this entire bucket. meaning roughly 40 or 45% of what's being asked for would be funded. I think that, and I understand people have desires to fund specific projects, and these are a little bit more general. But I would ask that we think about that bucket of sort of 8 through 11 as roughly $3.8 million, give or take. So $3.8 million is not a lot of money in this big bucket. And what I would ask is that we would think about, and I don't know if this can be done or not, but if a portion of some of the other buckets could be reduced, and I don't know if that's allowable, how we do it, if we're voting as a full bucket only or not, we would get, we would get 11 of our 12 items that we want if we simply reduced by $3.8 million in some of the other items above, from 11 through 1. And we could get almost everything we wanted. And so the other thing I would say is that items 8 through 11 do not add any operating costs to the city budget. There's already operating costs in Heritage Square, in the Orphan Theater. So those two, and then the rest are just simply building projects. There's no overhead. So by doing that, you would add no operating costs to the sort of the bucket that has been described in previous meetings, and we could fund 11 of the 12. So just a thought there.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow subcommittee members. Yeah, it's interesting how the ranking has been brought forth and cover a couple of topics with regards to, I'm first generation university grad, right? And the access I had to libraries was just unparalleled. It really makes an impact. And in today's society, it's one of those few venues where we can intersect people from all classes, right? So it's just not this individual going in, but you actually have society coming together in a free venue of expanding knowledge. So it's very, I think, very crucial to any expanding city as we are in Phoenix. So if we were to pass the 3 that are here now, we're still insufficient to other cities in library coverage. And the distance of 5 to 9 miles may not seem much if you have good transportation, but it's quite a distance if you don't. So strategically, Phoenix needs to really look at how it expands the ability to enhance the knowledge of its population. Nothing does that better than libraries, because at libraries today, you can hold events of all types and matter of which a community could not do on its own. So I think it's very vital that we really look into this. Now, the challenge I have in what we're looking at in libraries is the Yucca branch expansion. You literally could keep it as it is, take that money and build a new library, right? It's $10 million. So I'm not understanding why the cost is so high for an expansion versus building from ground zero up. So that's a little more information. As he mentioned, perhaps that's an area where we can cut back a little bit and roll into $3 million. The other question I have is, arts is part of your society. It's one of those pillars, just as knowledge is. But the theater is arts, so why is it not under arts and culture? I mean, that's just, I'm just throwing it out. How did it end up in this subcommittee here? But I think there's a strong sense of that libraries are indeed needed and necessary in society. I too was wondering, how did the Desert View end up at the bottom of the list? And again, I think it's this class vision that, okay, they have the money, why are we going to add it up there? But as we expand as a city, we need to really look at how we expand, but not into silos. Libraries allow people to come to a venue to really interact, intersect, learn, and just come together as a community. So I love to see the funding embrace society. In that respect, libraries do it quite well. I'm also a strong advocate for ADA improvements, and I think we got a high ranking in that. So I think we're moving in a good direction. I'd just like to know more about why does that expansion cost as much as it does? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I too was surprised to see that the new branch library was number 12 for the Desert View Civic Space. I have to say that I truly believe that when it comes to facilities like a library, these are things that are needed in every community, regardless of income, regardless of color, regardless of education, because they are so much more today than they used to be. I guess somebody could have a better argument for me had I not been exposed to the extraordinary library that we have in Central City South at Harmon. The things that happen at that library connect the community. They bring resources that are amazing. I can't tell you how many employment opportunities have occurred for our residents in our neighborhoods as a result of the library work. The many partnerships that are formed because of the library's presence. And in a time when across the country and in Phoenix, we have pretty much defunded our recreation department, who in many cases provided some of these types of things at recreation sites. The library actually picked up some of those things. And so, and I say defunded in not a formal sense, but when people cut down programming, it really then removes something from the community. But when you talk about things that need to be present in a community, I don't know how we can not talk about a library being present in any community. Because again, learning, growing, advancing, experiencing really has no dollar sign attached to it when it comes to the resident. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olivas. The subcommittee members would like to make any comments or have any questions for the staff?
Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Dodd.
Chairman James, this is Alan. I'd like to partially address Mr. Brown's question. I think as it relates to the library costs, comparing the Yucca branch expansion to the other two ones, the other two branch libraries are in high growth areas for the city where we charge impact fees for new development. So there are impact fee monies that are being collected to help pay a portion of the capital cost to build those two facilities. So that's why the numbers are lower there.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Dodd.
Just to kind of piggyback on what Committee Member Clocky said, is there a way to look at reducing? I don't know if this is more of a staff question. Is there a way to reduce these and still have a viable project?
Mr. Chairman, I will remind the subcommittee that some of the programs and projects that are on this list are scalable, specifically the three projects related to ADA, service center improvements, and downtown city improvements. Those are scalable programs, and so to the extent that you were to reduce the funding, it just means we would do less of that. But that is certainly within the subcommittee's discretion to make some changes. And I think if you'd like, we can start to help facilitate that discussion with a tool that shows some of the math. I think that might be helpful now.
Yes, I would appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. We do have a kind of an Excel spreadsheet system that will help visualize what these changes that the subcommittee is discussing look like in the way of an alternative ranking. So Chris is pulling that out, or pulling that up. The one thing that I would ask is, rather than making changes to this spreadsheet based on every single comment that comes up, that we try to get some degree of consensus, if not even an action, before we start moving things around. Because once we start moving, it might be hard to bring it back.
Okay.
And if I can, just to orient you to what you're looking at, you should be able to see it on your screen. It's also on the TV to my right. This is again the rank ordered list as was presented earlier. Chris has access to a model behind this where he's able to revise the ranking that will move the projects around in the list, reorder them. You will see that the survey rank value will remain set. So again, the projects will get reordered as we assign different rankings, as the subcommittee assigns different rankings. You'll also see the cumulative cost rate of growth change as the ordering changes. And finally, as was just discussed, should the subcommittee desire to revise any of the project cost amounts, we can do that on the back end as well and have that reflected on the table that you're looking at.
Okay. Well, one thing that I like to believe that all of us do, we do believe in libraries. So there's some uniformity on that. I'd like to believe that. As far as just overall ranking, from what I see here, I was very surprised to see that the Desert View, the branch at Desert View was wound up as number 12. If we were to go through this process of identifying what this particular group, this particular subcommittee is wanting to move forward on, as far as just changing numbers and amounts, I'm just curious as to how much, would there be very much disruption in as far as coming up with a decision as we move forward? Or?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, our job as staff is to manage the disruption. Confident we can take.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, on Desert View, because of the discussion on the committee, I took a quick look at how the survey results, particularly for that project, excuse me, stacked up. There were 2 members who ranked it second, 1 who ranked it third, 1 who ranked it fourth, 2 who ranked 11, and 3 who ranked 12. So 5 of the 9 subcommittee members independently ranked it 11th or 12th, whereas 4 ranked it number 2, 3, or 4. So clearly the individual results reflected that there was a difference in viewpoints among committee members on that particular project.
Thank you. Okay. Subcommittee members, do you have any other questions or comments that you would like to address? Yes, Ms. Olivas.
So I just want to get some clarity here. So the number here is 677. Are we trying to get to a particular number? And if so, then that's one question. And the second question is, based on this current project cost here that's listed, for example, under number 2 where it says city facility ADA improvements 10,100,000, we could make a recommendation to move that to 8 million. Am I right?
Madam Chair, Member Olivas, yes, that is correct.
Okay.
And I just wanted to reiterate that the subcommittee recommendation is going to the executive committee, and they're not compelled to keep however you wish to send it forward. So they will be able to move projects in and out, change funding levels, What I would say is most important for the subcommittee is to make sure to rank the projects in terms of what's most important. So that way, as the executive committee is looking at all the different subcommittee buckets and the important needs throughout the city, they will know from the subcommittee what are the ones that really needed to be funded, and then have to figure out how to make that money work in that $500 million bucket, if that makes sense.
Okay, so so I just want to make sure I understand, because I can follow the rules as long as I know them. So we could literally send the 66,677 forward. We could literally say, no, this is what we're recommending, and here's a ranking order. Is that something that you're saying we can do?
Mr. Chairman and Member Libas, yes, that is something you could certainly do. I would say the downfall to that is that the executive committee will decide then what is most important in terms of paring things down, and you as a group won't have the benefit of, the reason you're here is that you know and understand things about libraries, historic preservation, and city services, and that's why you're part of the subcommittee. And so you'd be abdicating how you break some of that stuff up and leaving that up to however the executive committee decides.
So let me ask another question that's related, I think, but unrelated. So when we get through this round and there are things on here that we're not moving forward, are those things going to be put on a list for the next round of bonds, or are they starting all over again at that time? Do you know? Or do we know yet?
Madam Chair, or I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Member Olivas, what would happen now from the subcommittee is the executive committee would get your recommendation and say, here's the projects that were not recommended to move forward. And then, assuming that holds out through executive committee, and then it's ultimately up to the council who will make that final determination, whatever is left, at that point, would be part of some future discussion when we do that next bond in 5 years, in terms of this is what was left over, and start looking there. Whether or not any of that gets funded and done in some other way, those things would all take place in that 5-year time period.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Dodd.
I don't want to put anybody on spot, but there are 3 different historic preservation grant funds listed there in the priorities, and I wondered, I see the way that they're listed, but in reality, in how those funds are used within the program, some grant funds are utilized more than others, and I didn't know if staff had any kind of feedback in terms of what is most utilized and key to their program. Just in, there's three grant programs, and some people think we're just giving money to private property owners for these things, and we're actually purchasing a conservation easement. We're getting something for it, for those funds. And so, not to put anybody on the spot, I didn't know if, if you've got 3 programs there and we know we have to cut funds,
Of a lifeline.
Chair, members of the subcommittee, we have Kevin Waite and Helena Reuter from our Historic Preservation Office here to answer that question.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Kevin Waite, and we do have the 3 different grant programs, and I will throw this out too. They are potentially scalable as well, because they're not any set dollar amounts. They are reduced amounts from what has been funded previously. So we're already kind of starting at a lower spot than we have done in the past. But the exterior rehab grants are for historic homes, largely within our residential historic districts. and so they would be limited to that particular use. The demonstration project grants have a much broader application. They can be used for commercial projects, for multifamily residential, for churches, schools, pretty much anything. We have even used them for residences in the past, but they're really geared toward non-residential properties. And then the warehouse and threatened building grant funds, as the name implies, warehouses, which have generally been considered threatened in Phoenix in recent years, and then any other buildings that come up that are potentially endangered are eligible to receive those funds as well. And there's been a number of different projects that have received those funds in the past. So from a staff perspective, obviously we have the most flexibility with demonstration, and then the warehouse and threatened building would probably be the second priority, with the exterior rehab being the least amount of flexibility.
Thank you. And do you, from year to year, whatever funds are available generally are spent. But I didn't know if there were any volumes you wanted to look at in terms of any comments on the amount that you think you would utilize if this year to year, if this amount is appropriate, or sometimes more than what you typically spend, or is it appropriate as listed here?
Well, I think it's fair to say whatever we get, we'll spend. We'll find a way. There's certainly demand, and there's been some pent-up demand because, as you know, we have not had exterior rehab grant funds available for a few years. The last round was in 2015, and we just started that up again due to some money that was allocated through the general fund. I think the question that remains in many of our minds is, will that general fund money continue? If not, then the bond obviously is our only recourse. But we've been doing about $200,000 per year for an exterior rehab round, so the money that's allocated here would be sufficient for that program. We have had more money in the past for demonstration projects and for warehouse threatened buildings. We'll take what we can get, obviously, and we'll find a way to spend it because the needs are there. We have managed to do some partnerships through community and economic development as well to get creative with some of the funding. But, having the money here available would be a great blessing for the program.
Thank you. I believe what I heard was as those three grant programs are listed in the rankings, that's pretty much staff's thoughts as well, and that the funding, you'd like it to stay as proposed, but obviously is scalable as well. All right, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like Mr. Clocky's idea on taking items 8 through 11 and seeing if we can shave off that amount from other categories or other items listed. So those items are about $3.8 million, which means if we shaved off on items 2, 3, 4, and 5, a little under $1 million on each of those, we would have a lot of projects included. I don't know if you can, Mr. Miller, put that in your spreadsheet to see what that might look like on those numbers. But I am keeping in mind $1 million out of $10 million, that is about 10% of the overall budget for each of those projects, which is going to impact what they can do with that.
Subcommittee Member Smith, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, yes, that is exactly the type of adjustment that we would be able to make using this spreadsheet. As I mentioned previously, I'd like to get that direction from the committee before we start making those types of tweaks.
Yes, Ms. Rouse.
Before we start talking about shaving money off of some of these items, how much? Again, I think I heard earlier how much in total does the city need in ADA improvements? 10 million is not going to address it all, correct?
Madam Chair, Committeemember Roush, that's correct. That 10.1 million is going to be spread out over 2 million a year to address the most critical needs from that study, and we anticipate that there'll be more in the next bond cycle as well to address the backlog of deferred maintenance as it relates to ADA also.
So the number is much higher. So that was part one. Part two, when it comes to libraries, I feel we need to see the bigger picture here because, number one, we can Google and see how long it's going to take from library to library. But if you know these communities, specifically for Estrella Civic Space, I would consider this kind of my sister village. I live down in Levine and close to Cesar Chavez Library. If we did not have public transportation, it's maybe 2 miles away from my house. The Estrella Civic Space does not currently have bus service. So even if they do not have a library there, to get to the nearest libraries, to get to my library, they would have to either take a taxi, they'd have to somehow ride share to get to this. And we're talking, this is a very young neighborhood, and they are dropping a lot of houses, high density building. And if you were to drive down to Broadway, you would see just how many communities are popping up right now, with many more in the pipeline. This particular neighborhood has waited a very long time to get their share, to get something, a place to meet. I mean, libraries are this, it's like the epicenter of your neighborhood, and they don't have that right now. So I was upset to see Desert View Civic Space ranked so low. Libraries are very important to our entire city. We all will succeed when everybody has that hub of a neighborhood. And back to the ADA improvements, I feel that as well. Making the city more accessible to everyone benefits every one of us, to see them in our spaces, to see them participating and not having to struggle to get around and be a part of the city. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, just some clarity here, again, with the libraries. I'm a little concerned when we start talking about shaving off $1 million here, $1 million there. I mean, I think the big shift will be if we put Desert View as a higher priority, right? And those impact fees, and those are growing communities. I was just in California, they do a lot of that too, right, Melrose? So therefore, if there's more housing going into those zones, those impact fees, there's more there. Would that then offset, like a Desert View, library, et cetera, saying that, you know, these are not going to be built right away, so there's some more capital that could presumably be there for those developments, yes or no?
Subcommittee Member Brown, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Mr. Brown is correct. There will be additional impact fees being generated from those areas. There are specific provisions in the Arizona state statutes that restrict how much impact fees can fund in the way of a library. So it's a small percentage of the overall library cost. But yes, the revenue will continue to be generated.
Thank you very much for that clarity. So I'm looking strategically at, you know, this goes to the executive committee. And so if we're presenting public buildings that look forward to having even more, you know, some capital added to that, it may help them in their decision to best use this bond generally. So I would think that's a strong addition to indicating that Desert View should have a priority on this subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question last time about whether there had been any studies done about ticket. So first of all, I want to say, and I think I speak for everybody here, that if we had unlimited funds, these are all worthwhile projects. So I don't think there's anybody who thinks that any of these are not, including me about the question I'm about to ask. But last time I had asked if there were any studies done about ticket prices and whether or not we were in line from an Orpheum theater approach to other venues, and whether or not there was room for the Orpheum to charge more in order to kind of balance out what this project cost could be.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Osaran, John Chan is here from Convention Center, but I would call your attention to the memo in your packet that does provide some of the information. We did attempt to respond to your question with the memo that is here, but John is here to speak specifically to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. As we discussed before, we are reviewing the rate ordinance for all of our venues, but at this point in time, we are not in the process of recommending a new rate increase. That is being worked on, but hasn't been brought forward yet. Rates are set by the City Council. So I understand the questions and the nature of the question, and your points are well taken, but also this request before this body is a historic preservation item. So it has nothing to do with the use of the facility as a performing arts or cultural venue. This is solely for the restoration of a 1929 theater that has not been restored for 25 years. So that's why this item is before this body, as it's a HP item which is under your charge.
Chairman, members of the committee, I could just add real quick, if the subcommittee wanted to recommend to the executive committee and council that they should look at increasing the rates, that could be something you could send forward. Just you guys don't have any purview of that as it sits, and as Mr. Chan said, that's being studied and looked at, but you could send that forward as your wish and desires if you wanted to do that. It just wouldn't change anything here as you're looking at the numbers.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Olivas.
So, again, I'm sorry, I'm always trying to get clarified with what I can do. The study or the survey ended up with this as a result, but we can converse today and we can actually request to move something from the ranking of 12 to the ranking of 4 or 5. Am I right? Okay. So, with that, do I need to make a motion, or do I need to make a motion, or do I just see if people would be considered? I don't know what the process is for that.
Should we vote on this?
I would defer to you, Mr. Chairman, on how you want to proceed, but we do need to make sure that we have clear direction and comfort that the full committee understands what the change that is being made.
Okay.
And so a motion would be helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, I will entertain a motion.
Okay. I would like to make a motion to move item number 12 to item number 4. That's my motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Those who are opposed?
No.
You're opposed? I'm opposed. Okay. Is there anyone? Okay. All right. I believe that the nays have it, if I'm right in my, oh, no.
Can we do an actual count here?
Maybe we should do a roll call.
Yes.
We definitely need to hear everyone's vote, so that would certainly be helpful if you could turn on your mic when you vote, and we'll hash it so that we can keep a good count. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe we should do this again as far as, so that we know. Okay. We'll start with
No.
Mr. Clucky.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Aye.
No.
No.
Yes.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 5 ayes and 4 noes.
Okay. Motion passes. Okay. All right. Yes, Mr. Clucky.
if I could add one comment, there's been a lot of talk about the number of people who use the libraries. What I can tell you is that Heritage Square has probably a festival every other weekend and gatherings that attracts hundreds of thousands of people to free events year after year after year. So if we're talking about free access to an incredible variety of ethnic, cultural, you name it type events, that's the place in the city where it happens. And so if we step back and think about if that's what we're talking about, and we're talking about one library and how many people go to that one library versus some of these other things that people go to visit. The Orpheum Theater has a lot of free events every single year. Your city council members get inducted in the Orpheum Theater every year. All these things happen in the Orpheum Theater for high schools, for grade schools. A lot of them are free. And so I think we need to look at the actual amounts of money that we're saying should be spent on one thing versus what could be spent on other things, a lot less, quite honestly, to have a lot more of our citizens be involved in. So I guess I would then, if we're going to start knocking things down the list, I fear that we're just going to simply not look at necessarily what's serving the most people. And so I would highly caution that we start thinking about it in terms of who we're serving. And again, if 10 million just knocked everything off, so now you're knocking off numbers 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and probably, yes, all those go away. From 7 through 11, all gone. So there will be literally nothing for historic preservation with that movement, nothing. And I can tell you right now, there will be a lot of people upset at the major executive committee meeting if that happens. A lot of people. So I think we need to rethink that a little bit and maybe approach it a little bit differently.
Yes, Mr. Arsar.
I would defer to Mr. Brown, and then I'll come back. It's okay.
Hello. Yes, I can hear the opinion. And let's say we have the historic preservation. That's in Phoenix, where, you know, the value of properties, real estate in that area is just ballooning. I'm looking at strategically that this perhaps could get picked up by the city budget itself in the coming year, because it is quite small. Over a 5-year period, $1.7 million, $3 million. If it is that important, they're not going to let it squander. But they're not going to step up and put those libraries in. Libraries hit a lower class of society and a higher class. The groups that going downtown is not going to represent out there, Levine, et cetera, right? And it's going to have a long-term impact. So to balance out, I'm thinking that how are we capped at 52 million? I mean, if we come in at higher, does that mean we're cutting off? I still don't understand our positioning by which we come in at 40 million or we come in at 60. Does that threaten or reduce our opportunities to have what we conclude with to be what it is? I mean, how do we stand with that, with the executive committee?
Chairman James, members of the subcommittee, at the end of the day, the executive committee has to get down to $500 million from 647. And that 647 was prioritized. There are a number of other things, like you guys considered DUPA, but there are other subcommittees that got completely new projects presented. And so whatever that number comes forward with, the $500 million doesn't change. And so it will be up to the executive committee to figure out exactly how they're going to break up spending that money and allocate it. And so that's why staff's recommendation is you want to be mindful of the dollars, but you really want to make sure that you're ranking them most importantly, because at the end of the day, that's what the executive committee is going to have to decide. And I wish I could give you better, advice of, oh, they're going to make everyone do a 22% reduction across the board. Mathematically, that's what it works out to get to 500, but I don't know that that's how it's going to work out. And so it's entirely up to the executive committee to decide how that will lay out. And so I think the best course of action for you guys is, like we said, prioritize your ranking and then look at what you can do with the money you have allocated. And we do have a suggestion, if the committee wants to hear it, as it relates to historic preservation, that might work to address some of those concerns.
I personally would love to hear what that would be.
As you will recall from our prior discussions, the Orpheum Theater exterior rehabilitation would be eligible under an HP demonstration project grant. So one of the ideas that we were just conferring about here would be to combine the HP warehouse and threatened building program, the demonstration program, the Orpheum Theater program, and the HP exterior rehabilitation grant program. So you take all four of those ones, and that would have been $5.8 million if they were funded and voted on, because. But you could just do $4 million. That would include all of those ones, and then there's clearly less money for grants down the road for other projects. But by combining it all into one, that gets at Member Dodd's kind of concern about sometimes you have more in one pot than others. You have one pot for all of it that you could pick and choose as the needs come forward over that 5-year period. And so we think that's something that could work as well from staff's perspective. But you guys need to decide how you wish to do that.
So, Mr. Chairman, what essentially that would do would establish a program such as the ADA program, where you have a number from which we would work to implement the purpose of the program.
Mr. Clocky.
I think that's fine. We'd still be number 7. We'd be below the number that the cutoff is. And the reality is, folks, we have a very small pot compared to fire and police. Guess who's going to win? Fire and police are going to win on that, which is a very important thing. But when push comes to shove, parks, historic preservation, libraries, and so forth tend to get pushed down on the list. So you have to go in, I think, with a number that gives less wiggle room for the executive committee to actually cut. And so if we go in at the 52 million, we're already saying, hey, we're willing to do our part. We're willing to do our part. And we're trying to make your life a little bit easier, executive committee, by saying we will take that haircut and do it to ourselves and not make the heavy lifting and hard stuff up for you. Now, that's not to say that they wouldn't say, okay, we're getting rid of the entire pot. But it's a lot harder to get rid of it when we've done the work for them already ahead of time, because the pressures will be enormous on the executive committee. I can guarantee you. Just look at the pots that are in your PowerPoint here, and the pressures on this committee to do certain things and to fund certain activities will be much more extreme than they will on our pot.
Yes, Mr. Sering.
I'd like to validate Mr. Clocky's feelings. I totally understand where you're coming from, and one of the things that I was thinking is, for our consideration, is perhaps we could do the combination as the city suggested, and actually promote it over like the downtown city improvements, and that way, then the sliding fees or the city center service property improvements. That way the sliding nature of those can be used, and we still would get some of the advantages that you're talking about from like Heritage Square and things like that. And basically, so deprioritize the ones that have the ability to slide.
Ms. Dodd.
All right. So would that be so we already voted to move the Desert View Civic Space Library up to position number 4. So would it be a separate motion to combine the historic preservation related and then move it to become item number 5? Is that a separate motion? So
Yes, Chairman.
So I'd like to make that motion.
Okay. All right. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, to clarify, are we also adjusting the funding level for those 4 to $4 million?
Oh, yes, because we're trying to cut the money, not just prioritize. So yes, and that total amount for that historic preservation program portion to be $4 million.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Member Dodds, the Law Department has advised me that we should do it in 2 motions. So one, to combine them and do it at $4 million, and then vote on that, and then separately vote on where it should be.
Okay.
I will withdraw my motion, right?
Okay.
It's withdrawn. And I will make a new motion to combine the preservation items into one program and reduce the total funding to $4 million.
Okay. You have a motion. Is there a second?
And Madam Chair, before you vote, that also would include the Orpheum funding in there
The
as well,
the
correct?
3 grant programs, Orpheum Theater, but not Heritage Square. So the motion would be to take the 3 historic preservation bond programs and, Orpheum Theater, and lump them together into one program for historic preservation with $4 million in funding, which is less than they would have been individually.
Okay. That's your motion. Is there a second?
Could I have comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I am sympathetic, as everyone else on the subcommittee, that everything here on this list is something we want. And I'm looking at, if something is left off, what has the best opportunity to acquire capital elsewhere? Other cities I've lived in, this historic preservation corporations step up and, put forth funding. So we're looking at $4 million, and there's huge corporations in Phoenix. So that's just an aside. I want to move forward in the motion, but I'm also want to state the fact that if something's left off, what has best opportunity to acquire capital that doesn't come from the bond, and that's what will happen with the historic preservation, because it's done in many other cities through corporate donations.
Yes, Ms. Dodds.
I don't know that the city of Phoenix has any kind of corporate or nonprofit or something that offers funding. There are heritage funds, as Kevin Waite has mentioned in past meetings. There are heritage funds that can be applied for. But I think right now the maximum they allow is $150,000. We were lucky enough to get funding of $300,000 for another preservation project, but I believe their funding has been reduced to $150,000. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be awarded that much or that you'll be awarded anything.
I'm not clear. I'm talking about private enterprise, where just another side that it would be, it's done all the time, where a corporate, this is outside of the government. This is where, okay, we have a need, and they'll say, okay, we would support this. I'm just saying that type of need is covered that way.
Yes, Ms. Dodd.
Phoenix is not quite like other large cities where they do have foundations that raise money and offer grants. Phoenix has wonderful, wonderful organizations that support preservation, but they are advocacy groups. They don't offer funding.
I don't think, well, just a comment.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We don't think we have a second for the Vice Chair's motion.
No, we do not.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
No, we do not. Is there a second?
Could I offer an amendment to that?
Absolutely.
I would like to say if we're that we actually make it $5 million and that we include Heritage Square in that because, as I said previously, Heritage Square has more Phoenicians going to it than probably all the libraries combined. And if we want to see that continue, we need to maintain it. So I would offer a friendly amendment of making it $5 million. You would
Mr.
accept that
Hodge?
amendment?
I accept that.
Okay, we have a motion and a friendly amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. All right. Starting from Mr. Clockey, we will
Aye.
vote.
Aye.
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 Unanimous. Now, the second motion would be, where would you wish to rank it as you bring forward?
So I'll start with a motion to move it to item number 5 in the ranking.
Second it.
Is there any discussion here?
Second.
All right. Starting with Mr. Clockey, we will vote.
Aye.
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 Subcommittee members? Yes, Mr.
Just a quick
Mr.
question.
John.
So if we do that, we're moving all 12 projects forward, but ranked as per the motions and that were approved. And I'm just looking, we haven't reduced the overall dollar amount much, but maybe that's not important, and what's important is the ranking. Am I clear on that?
Is that correct? It is pretty much the ranking that we're looking at in this instance, as opposed to the amount.
Mr. Chairman, the ranking is vital. It's very critical that the executive committee understand the priorities that you've identified. It will be the executive committee's job then to not fund, to a degree, the projects that come forward. So we are making it a little harder on the executive committee by not suggesting a reduction. And of course, you, Mr. James, are a member of the executive committee.
Would it behoove us to remove the one that is kind of last on the funding list, not including DUPA, the downtown city improvements, or to reduce the funding by maybe both of those by half or something like that? Would that be a better received by the executive committee?
I think that's probably our decision if we want to do this, if we want to remove. Yes, Ms. Dodd.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard exactly what you said. Could you repeat that with
Sure.
which items you're talking about?
Sure. So it would be basically two options, either putting all these forward and reducing the funds for 6 and 7, or removing one of those.
I wonder if it's possible to see the new ranking so we can see in the order as per those two motions, so that we could then see what now is number 7, what now, I'm confused as which.
I think is it there? In the screen, yeah, it's G.
Oh, I'm sorry, it is
no
there.
problem, G
Okay.
20 and 21.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
What I'm sensing from the staff is that if we were to kind of chip it down a little bit, we're in a stronger position. So I'd like to follow up with the gentleman indicated that perhaps the last two, we can shave them down, or I would also follow through with or taking one off. Just to bring that budget down somewhat.
If we were to shave it down, how much would we shave it down to? Mr. Clucky?
Maybe staff can help us out. Are there sort of, it looks like I think it was 52 million we got to get it down to, so we essentially are saying we're at 54 if we include number 6, so with those last two, we're 12 million over, so we essentially got to cut 12 million to get it to 52 or whatever it was. So it'd be like 6 million apiece for numbers 6 and 7. Cut 6 million from numbers 6 and 7. But I don't know if there's a more logical break, if staff has a sense of that or not, to say, hey, we're really trying to get X done in this bucket versus something else. And I don't know if they can do that or not.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So to go back to early in the presentation, there was an illustration of what a pro rata cut across all committees would look like. That number for this committee would be about 40.5 million, 40.5. So as it stands, that would include the first 4 items.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Brown?
Yes, if I asked it. So what you presented to us as that target and what we need to perhaps come down to that 40 million, is the executive subcommittee is going to look at the same chart? Are you going to present that to them?
Chairman James and Mr. Brown, yes, they will get that same information. Now, they do not have to, like I start out saying, that's one option they may choose to do it if they were just going to do it equitably across the board. They don't have to do that. It's going to be entirely up to them. But they'll be given that information.
But they're going to take it as a guide, perhaps, right?
Well, staff will present that information. Exactly what they do with it, I can't guarantee.
All right, thank you. With that said, I think we should really consider reducing our budget as much as possible to that point.
Yes, Mr. Clucky.
A question here. On the one slide, you have our total as basically 66 million, give or take. And then on the other slide, you have, if I can read it, sorry, I'm getting too old. You have 40.5 and 52.4.
Thank you, Member Clocky. Mr. Chairman, that reflects the changes to the budget for the library items. When they were originally tallied, they came up to the 52. The whole list came up to 52, but then we got the additional figures from library, and that's what has increased it to 66. But you're right, that is not reflected in the bar chart.
So what number are we supposed to get down to then? I'm confused. My bad.
Once again, I'll just say that these numbers are guides. And if it's the subcommittee's desire to send more than 40 million forward, you certainly can.
So our original number was like 60.7 million?
That's 66 million.
And then it's now
It's
52.4.
52.5.
Yeah.
I think.
It was 52.4 was the original number, and you'll recall that in I think our first meeting, we talked about revised costs that the library department had received based upon more information, and that's what drove up that number. But it doesn't change at that point. The executive committee and that it had all been allocated, and the reports were written, so it doesn't change the number that we got to work with in terms of what that 52.4 was. It just increased that amount for the libraries, and we talked about why that was the case. And in fact, we scaled back I think the Estrella and I believe the Desert View one, both from the bigger, had more involved to a medium-sized one because of those increased costs. The library came back and had recommended that as part of their discussion when Rita was here 2 meetings ago.
So I should ignore slide 6 then?
Madam Chairman James, yes, Member Clock. I think the 29.5 was the original prioritized projects from the report. It did not look at the additional money from the library report.
Okay. And so really the number is 40 million, not 52 million now. If they were to cut evenly across all the different pots.
Chairman James, Commissioner Clocky, yes, if they were to cut evenly, and again, we don't know that that's how it will work, but that's what it would equate to.
Mr. Chairman, I would have to say at this point that my suggestion to defer some of the libraries is looking better to me even than before.
Chairman James, members of the committee, I think one thing that you guys can recommend if you're inclined to the executive committee is that send forward the higher dollar amount and with a comment that you had to absorb these additional costs because of the refined information from the library department. So you're still effectively cutting, which is what the task was from the executive committee, but you had an increase in cost because of the refined library department numbers.
Yes, Mr. Clocky?
Did any of the other pots shrink like ours shrank? Like there was numbers that changed in the middle of the process? Because if we do it, if we do the same cuts now on a pot that is essentially $14 million smaller and still have to cut on top of that, are the other groups, did they have their pot shrunk down like that as well? Because we're essentially taking a double hit at this point if we do this.
Member Clocky, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, again, I'll reiterate, there are no pots at this point. There's one $500 million pot, but there certainly are other subcommittees that have received requests for additional projects, additional funding, and thereby kind of the perspective that Mr. Clocky is taking, increasing the amount of cutting at the subcommittee level. So it's not unique in that sense. There are other subcommittees that likely would be forwarding more than what is in their prioritized needs.
Yes, Mr. Brown?
I'd like to just bring this forth. I mean, we haven't really spoken to regarding, city service and downtown city property. I mean, if we were to cut back exceedingly or cut out totally, I mean, no one on the subcommittee has really spoken about that. So that it seems to be the lowest on our list. Is it pragmatic even to cut these in half, each one? I mean, I have no sense of the amount that is necessary to really make those services effective. And so I'm just bringing that forth, just speaking out loud. I mean, if we're going to cut, it seems to be those are the two activities. So I bring it forth to the subcommittee. What is the feeling on that?
Yes, Ms.
I pulled our packet from early August. Just a reminder, under City Service Center property improvements, we're talking about the repair or replace mechanical and building systems such as roofs, asphalts, plumbing, electrical, and security systems. And then under the downtown city improvements, address major equipment and building deficiencies at facilities in the downtown Phoenix government campus. So these are structural issues that we're talking about, which is that what was requested? That's not everything, is it? That was just a number thrown out there at $10.1 million.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Joe Giudice, Public Works Director. So yes, a reminder, a refresher, because there's been a lot of conversation about a lot of very important things. The Downtown Facilities Project and the City Campuses Project, City Services Facilities Project, we had done facility condition assessments with a third-party engineer that has visited these locations and identified things like the roof, the heating and ventilation systems, the sewer systems, other structural systems, water systems, just the basic infrastructure for these facilities, and identified in both cases about $40 million worth of deferred need, meaning these properties, these roofs should have been replaced, these plumbing systems should have been replaced, these parking lots should have been replaced. And so we obviously knowing this was a $500 million bond program, prioritized as best we could a $10 million program for each of those locations to address those needs, also in recognition of what can be done in 5 years. There's a lot to be done, and 5 years seems like a long time, but it's really not by the time you get design contracts, contractors, et cetera. So what could be reasonably completed in 5 years? What are the prioritized systems? And so those programs, you have a difficult task in front of you. We've already trimmed these as presented to you, and yet you have to consider trimming more and against other priorities like important things like libraries, et cetera. I hope that answers your question. The $10 million represents about 20 to 25% of the needs for those facilities, and those are already kind of deferred, past due needs at those locations.
Yes, Ms. Olivas.
So if you don't get this funding, what will happen? Will you close something?
Well, what would happen is, as we would continue to try to maintain buildings, I don't know that we can close anything. These are major service centers that our water department, solid waste department, fleet, every operation, streets department is working out of. The downtown buildings like City Hall, Calvin Good, we can't close them down. We would make repairs as much as possible. I think there was some mention earlier today about you don't make investments, and so you wind up, maybe that was made at an earlier subcommittee today. It's been a straight day of subcommittee meetings on these things, but essentially if you don't replace things, you're just spending money to repair them, to keep them operational. So the impacts would be on, system goes out, we have to shut down a community center for several days until it can be repaired, shut down a facility, take restrooms out of order until repairs can be made. In terms of the funding, there's not really, there's a pot of funding that the city maintains out of its capital budget that we prioritize projects for. So over the last few years, we've been replacing important fire life safety systems so that the sprinklers work if a fire were to happen, things like that. Elevator systems, other modernization things, critical, important things like that. And so essentially we would duct tape things, I guess, as best we could.
I wonder if we were to take a percentage of cost off of each, because obviously we want to fund everything, but we cannot fund everything to the amount that we're looking at right now. But if we were to take, 5%, 2%, I don't know, ultimately, what would that do for us moving forward? I don't know if it would be 2%, 3% in order to move forward. It is only a suggestion on my part. I'm not a math guy, but
so Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I think this is probably where, that the ranking of your projects comes in terms of priority, and because we don't know exactly where you would need to end up, I think making sure that you have your top ones, and then if the city services in downtown stay where they're at and stay at the 10.1 as your bottom recommendation, then the executive committee can decide what they're going to fund that level at, knowing that your other ones are higher up, and that gets you in the ballpark. I think with the historic preservation one at number 5, you're at about 44, and versus the 40, what was it, 40.2, 40.5. So you're in the ballpark in that, and then the executive committee could decide how the other two pots end up, if that's how you want to do it.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could
Peters.
add, I think one point that perhaps we weren't able to articulate was that, as Mr. Miller indicated, some of the other subcommittees received new projects on top of the prioritized capital needs that we identified at just under $650 million, we staff. So the starting number is actually significantly higher than $647 million, given those additional projects that have come forward. So there's a lot of shaving that needs to happen. And so with that in mind, and with the library adjustments in mind, and having to absorb those additional costs, I might suggest that we focus strictly on the ranking. And then we have another meeting after this. We have one more meeting. Perhaps if we can come out of today with a ranking, then we can get a little more feedback about dollar figures.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Yes, following up what the chair had mentioned regarding, after Ms. Peters just mentioned, to stick with the rankings, still kind of in the dollar sign, if we were to, say, decrease the percentage off the categories, and, the executive committee says, yes, we will move forward on the libraries, the historic, and then we understand it's insufficient funds, then they determine and will add the sufficient funds to have it completed. Is that something that's open? That I'm just saying that we move forward with these activities, and some of them are below the actual budget, but they approve it, then they will then commit to adding the necessary funds. Is that something open?
Member Brown, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I'm not sure I understand kind of the timing and the larger picture that you're referring to. Are you referring to the executive committee finding that gap funding to make up the difference? Or are you talking about in the future, assuming the bond goes to voters, gets approved at the time that a project is being delivered? I'm not sure I understood the context.
Yeah, thank you. It's been mentioned here that we're talking about maybe decreasing what's recommended as, say, $10 million for city services, right? And we come in and we say, we approved it at $5 million, but we know that's insufficient. So is that something that the executive committee will then say, okay, we approve it and we'll give it the 10, but we move it forward with a lower budget? I'm just, if that's making clarity.
Mr. Chair, committee members, so as I understand this correctly, yes, the executive committee could be making adjustments to funding levels identified by the subcommittee. So the subcommittee in its report could identify $5 million for each of those projects, with a note to the executive committee that a higher funding level is recommended, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
That seems like a reasonable proposal for us to do, is to make that note and make a proposal for our committee to reduce those, with a note that we recognize that it wasn't funded at full levels, but possibly should be.
Are you putting forth a
Sure. I'll make a motion to reduce the funding levels for current 6 and 7 to $5 million apiece, and with a note to the executive committee that we recognize that that was not funded and recommend full funding.
Mr. Chair, for clarification, can I suggest $5,050,000, recognizing the percent for arts on that $5 million pot?
I'd make that amendment, yes.
Okay. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second. All right. We will vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Aye.
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 Nay.
So you have 6 ayes, 1 no, and 1 abstention.
Motion passes. Yes, Ms. Dodd. No. Okay. Any other comments or questions as we move forward? Okay. All right. Do you, the staff, have anything else that they would like to share with us as we move forward?
Chairman, members of the committee, I think you guys are close enough that if you wish to, make a motion and approve this, that you can be done today with your recommendation and not have to have another meeting. We are at the 3 o'clock time frame. Depends on what you guys wish to do and how comfortable you are with this, but that is a possibility here for you.
Well, I will have to ask the subcommittee, how do they feel about that?
Like to move that we accept the priorities as discussed today and with the budget that's outlined currently.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Chairman James, members of the committee, if we could get clarity on exactly what the motion is in terms of what was discussed today, because there's lots of discussion. So we want to make sure, just so that it's reported accurately.
Do I need to go through all the priorities as they're written here now?
So,
or how do you want me? I need some help phrasing this. How's that?
perfect. So let us try and help, and then we can go from there. Adam, did you want to have anything, or you want?
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend a motion of identifying the projects that are being moved forward. So that's reading the project names of 1 through 8, with a note that the values as originally presented are approved with the exception of a historic preservation project funded at $5 million, City Service Center project improvements funded at $5,050,000, and downtown city property improvements funded at $5,050,000.
They so move.
Yes. Okay, I'd like to move that, or rephrase that, I'd like to move that we accept all of these projects with the exception of the historic preservation items will all be put into the one category for $5 million?
Chairman James, Member Lewis, if I could, I think we want to clarify that it's 1 through 7 on your screen, right, which goes down to downtown city property improvements.
Yes, I'm moving that one, items 1 through 7.
1 through 7, and in referencing the screen, we can then
On the
translate
screen,
that to
at the moment, we're looking at
to what that means.
with the associated project costs. How's that?
And a note to the executive committee that the additional funding should be found for the city service center and downtown.
And additional
items.
funding to be found for the city services
And the downtown.
and
awards,
downtown
right?
facilities.
Okay. Is
There
there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. All right. Starting with
Aye.
Mr. Clackey.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Ayes have it.
Yes, please. Anything from the staff before we adjourn this particular meeting?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, congratulations on being the first subcommittee to approve your recommendation for the executive committee. The next steps that will be taken, staff will prepare the subcommittee report. The subcommittee report that is being prepared is a standard report that will be used by all subcommittees. Once that's completed, that will be provided to Chairman James, and once the chairman has approved the report, it will be distributed to the subcommittee members and the executive committee. Any questions on those steps?
All right. Well, I really appreciate the effort that the staff has put forward. I really appreciate the effort from my subcommittee members. I really appreciate all that you all have done in being here. And thank you all. Enjoy the weekend. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Subcommittee.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add to DC's